Hello and welcome to the TrueWorks podcast, the podcast that attempts to help you understand how the gospel can transform your work and your wider life. I am your host, Joshua Smith, and this is my co-host, the esteemed Doug Meikle.
Doug? I am Doug, and apparently Joshua is just attempting on this podcast.
I thought I would lower the bar.
Yep. If you did not realize this already, Joshua merely attempts to fight his way through these podcasts, but that's okay.
Yeah, and you be the judge whether I succeed or not, I guess.
You be the judge. You be the judge.
Today we are discussing a newer book to the Faith Work Intensive curriculum, Art. It's a work by a new author, at least to Doug and I, called, is it Art and Faith or Faith and Art? I can't remember.
I think it's Art and Faith.
Art and Faith by, I'm going to butcher the name, Meiko Fujimura. Perhaps.
Yeah, I think actually the way they put it is Mako. I think.
Mako Fujimura. No, you're the linguist among us.
Yes, I am a linguist, especially of Japanese names. I mean, I feel I am completely confident about those.
That is your specialty.
Yes, that's definitely
among
my
other
specialty.
things, that and Scotch. That's kind of what you got down.
It's kind of what I do here.
And this text, it's a great text. It's a little text, about 130 pages. And what we have our Faith Work Intensive do, we have them read through 4 of the chapters. And it's quite a fascinating book because we don't typically, there's been a pretty strong emphasis in the Faith Work Intensive on business, science, or engineering, but a neglect in the past on what about this whole phenomenon of human experience and human creativity of the fine and performing arts? And what we have here in Mako's, I said it right. Yeah, Mako's book is an artist. He is both a visual painter, but I also think he does sculpture and pottery as well. But also someone, so he's an artist, but also someone who is articulate. Yeah. And he's a Christian, but an articulate Christian, theologically rich, which makes him like doubly or triply, I guess, if that's a word, rare. Yeah. We have so many, we have some great Christian artists, but difficult to articulate, and then some great Christian thinkers and theologians, but that are not artists. He brings these two together about not only how to be a Christian artist, but really the necessity of us as Christians being makers and creators ourselves. Fleshing that out is what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, so it's interesting you said in passing there, and I don't know if he would use this term or not. You call him a Christian artist. I don't think he would use that term. I think he would just call himself an artist.
Who happens to be a Christian.
Yeah. And in fact, maybe even a more deep challenge than that all art is somehow God inspired. And the fact that the act of making is what separates us as created beings from the rest of the creation. Yeah.
In a sense, giving that kind of label in the same way maybe Christian engineer. Yeah. Well, there are good and bad engineers, and you can do it to the glory of God or not. But there's no like uniquely Christian engineer that's different than the other way. Yeah. In the same way.
In the same way. And I think artists. I say one thing about him though that you did say that I thought was really a great thing.
Well, that's a relief. Yeah,
there's a relief. There is one thing you said, was how unique it is to see someone who, as a practitioner, is this kind of uniquely good practitioner, kind of world-class practitioner of whatever craft or art that he or she does, but also has this gift also of being able to give the observer a kind of a deeper insight to that process. Yeah. And that's a very rare thing. And I think what you have in this book is a person who is kind of really at the top of his game in terms of as an artist or a craftsman, but also is able to give you insight. Yeah, and I think that's a really profound thing about this little book. And I think this book's a bit different than the others in this podcast. You guys have been in this now for, this is episode 18. You've been in this for 17 episodes. These books me personally, I've read them 3 or 4 times, all of them now, right? We've been doing this for 6 or 7 years. This book I read in the last week, and I'm not sure I've got it processed yet. I think it's really, but it's kind of a profound book in its own way. It asks of us some, in its own way, very deep questions, I think, about what do we do with our lives and what do we value in our lives and what's the place that art can have within it. And I think, again, it can do that because for some artists, and this is no knock on any of these artists, the art that they create is their creation. They when asked to explain it, they say, "Well, you watched it."
Precisely.
That's it.
This is another aspect of like just fleshing out why it's so unique that he can articulate it.
Yeah.
Because the beauties and the designs and the crafting of art is sometimes, or often perhaps, mysterious to the creator.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, it's like I use a very down-to-earth example about my mother-in-law. I love my mother-in-law a lot, and she was a big influence on me. And she's a great Christian. But if you were to ask her, "How are you a Christian?" she wouldn't be able to tell you because she just does it. It's her. It's kind of this innate craft that she has that she's able to do it. And it's like why some people who are sportsmen or sportswomen, they can coach, and others can't. And maybe the greatest of all sportsmen can't coach because ultimately it's so deeply intuitive to them.
That's not a translation.
They just can't translate it to other people. Whereas this book is you're dealing with a person there who's a world-class artist who is able to give you this kind of deep insight into his craft. I think perhaps it's useful or there is part of his craft that's very useful in that regard, especially with his kind of Christian framing. He has this art called, I believe the pronunciation is katsugi.
You're the Japanese expert.
Yeah, I am the Japanese expert, and am I not? Yes, but and it is. Many of you guys have probably seen this thing before. It's the art of taking a broken piece of pottery and bringing together the broken pieces and gluing them together and adding minerals, particularly I think gold most of the time, to bring this piece of pottery, for example, back not to its original condition. That's an important thing in the kind of theology of that making, is that you don't bring the pottery just back to its original creation. You actually almost remake it, renew it, and make it kind of make it fulfill some kind of greater purpose, And I think he uses that in the course of going through these chapters as the analog is obvious there to what's happening in the grand arc of the Bible, is that it's not so much that the broken pieces are just glued back together again and everything is the same. As he puts in there, it's not like we just get back to the garden. We actually get to that city, that celestial city. Yeah. And I think that's a beautiful metaphor for the art and
importantly, when they put these pieces back together, I can't remember if you said this. What binds that are typically precious metals, platinum and gold. And so it's quite striking to see these crevices that are on the lines of the break of this piece of pottery, and then filled in is gold and platinum.
So again, the point there being is that as that piece of pottery is being remade, it's not simply being glued together and made like it was. It's being renewed and made better.
It's not just fixed, right? He uses this term,
it's not
fixed.
Just fixed, yeah.
And he has this nice kind of analogy, comparison of what Christians think of really what the gospel is doing to the world. So like how we even position and display and share the gospel about what it's actually doing is often that it's just fixing broken pipes is what he said. Yeah, the plumber's pipes.
The plumber's pipes,
And so, why is the gospel, God spelled the good news, why is it such good news? Well, because there's some things broken in the world, and the gospel's come to fix it. So he gives this kind of rhythm that he imagines Christians to be in, which I think he's accurate on this. Hey, you come to Sunday morning, you figure out some part of your life, your relationships, your finances, your desires that are broken. You get the gospel that gets in there and fixes the gears. You apply that this week, and then you come in,
Yeah.
there's a new thing broken, and you apply it again. That is dissatisfying to Fujimura.
Yeah. Well, ultimately, it's also not fixing the problem, I think, and the fundamental problem.
Okay, tell us about that a little.
Well, I mean, I think,
What do you mean?
I think this is his point, is that because he talks about you being the plumber and fixing the pipes, and you get to hear these pipe fixing sermons. Is that well? I'll give you an example. So, and churches do this, and there is some utility to this that they'll do.
By utility, there's some good things about this.
There's some good to this. Is that to do financial management class, right? So you come along to your 6-week financial management class, and with that, and there'll be principles in there that help you manage money and help you not get into debt or too much debt or whatever. But I've had this debate with several pastors of mine over the years, is how that, in actual fact, you're just kind of putting the sticking plaster over the top of the wound. You're not actually fixing the wound. The wound is that we put too much faith in what we can buy and what we can consume.
I see.
And what we can consume.
That's a good.
And his point is that so we're fixing the pipes and we're helping you manage your debt. The question really is, why am I in debt in the first place? Is it for a virtuous cause? Is it for a good thing? Because there's a big difference between buying a home that will be there as an appreciating asset and buying a boat that will be a depreciating asset. And that's not to say, yes, exactly. So that's a pretty crude example, because I'm not.
But it's
not
helpful
into,
though,
yeah.
because.
But I don't want people to think I'm like anti-boat or something like that. But the point is that underneath, there's where are your desires? Back to that Augustinian question. Where are your desires? And his point about fixing the pipes is that too many sermons and too many times you go to church, you're up here fixing the presenting symptom and not the underlying disease.
Yeah. It's focused on the dorsal fin of the shark, and not the shark itself. And what you need to be concerned about is the thing with the teeth.
The thing with the teeth.
The fin is just an indicator of what's below the surface. And in the way that he continues this very helpful plumbing analogy is asking, well, what in the world are the pipes there to begin with? What are they there for? To begin with? And if we don't get that question right, if we don't get understanding and live into, if you will, to stretch the analogy, getting the pipes not only just fixed, but understanding where they're flowing and where they're coming from, we're going to be in a hopeless state. And this opens up this beautiful, very new to me, that theology that he calls theology of making. Theology of making.
And his contention, of course, is that the artist has access to that in this kind of really profound way. The artist is one who makes, and in making sees the true, or at least can perceive perhaps the true purpose of things, that he sees more than just the pipes, or she sees more than just the pipes, but the flows through those pipes. Whereas, like you put there, where does this stuff come from and where is it going to? And that allows the great artist to be able to present back to us something that illustrates but also inspires the kind of humanness that we have. And I think this is a bit, it'll take me a while to process this, but this is really an encouraging, I find this really, really encouraging,
Yes, I do too. And, two of the things about the pipes that he mentions is it's not that the artist has a unique vocation and ability to see, as you said, the nature of things. But Fujimura is also quite democratic, if you will, about that, because we are made in the image of the great artist, capital A, that God is the great artist, that we are all, by extension, in different ways, of course, also makers or also little artists. Now, he goes through several chapters trying to convince us that, because if you saw me draw stick figures, you would be like, you, Joshua, are not an artist. But what he means there is simply a beautiful making of things through beauty, and mercy that are creating order and processes and objectives and achieving those for purposes that are greater than or goes beyond simply utility. So this can go all the way down to organizing a pencil drawer. Something as mundane as that. He doesn't.
Well, even as mundane as your philosophy PhD.
Now we're getting very mundane.
Now we're getting very. But the point is really there because that's your art. That's what you do.
Yeah.
And that's his point, is that we're all, as makers, artists with the small a. That is our humanity, and when we don't do that,
we're humanity.
We're dehumanizing ourselves.
Right.
So to the extent that we don't engage in those things that involve our making and forming, we're kind of dehumanizing ourselves.
Yeah.
And I think that's, like I say, another kind of profound insight here. That I just love that, and I didn't want to be facetious about I did want to be facetious about your PhD.
I think you did.
I think I did. I did actually. Yeah. Now I think about it. Now I challenge myself, but that was not really the purpose. The purpose is just to say we're all given something to do, and that we can make, and that making can be beautiful, and that making also affirms our humanity, and also crucially gives us access to something about God that we would not know in any other form.
Yeah.
And I think we are all artists in that sense. That's what makes us human, and we can bring that creating into work.
Yeah. And creating, he makes this distinction where he puts his thumb on this pulse of either Western or American Christianity that has kind of commoditized. Did I say that right?
Commoditized. Yeah.
The English and Japanese.
I know.
You're an expert.
I'm like,
and,
wow.
Yeah, linguist. Commoditize the gospel of not only, hey, take this gospel and it'll fix XYZ, your finances, your marriage, or whatever, but we're trying to sell you the gospel. And the way that you know that the gospel is succeeding is if your church attendance is up, or if you have people in your programs, and of course, all these metrics can have some utility. We're not against all metrics or something like that. But what he says is the gospel is not primarily about usefulness.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. There's a higher value.
Yeah.
And bringing that goal of, in my case, the craft of my scholarship, or as an engineer, designing to solve some type of technical problem or diagnosis for a doctor, and so on through the various homemaking and all the rest of the goal is not simply to fix, but to this higher value of making something more beautiful than we found it.
Yeah.
And that may take, he describes his own art making of this binding together of these broken pot shards, and how he intentionally picks methods that are painstakingly slow. In one particular description, the type of ink that is required grinds together poison sumac.
Yeah.
And so poison sumac is in the family of poison leaves like poison ivy and poison oak. And so a lot of people have reactions to it. Yeah. So you have to wear gloves, and it takes something like a year to dry. I had to read that twice. Yeah. And he's like, this is against all methods of efficiency. Yeah. There are more efficient ways, but is it more beautiful?
Yeah.
And so we as Christians, called to the one who is beauty, God is beauty itself. We have different pursuits than simply getting things done.
Yeah.
That's one of our values.
Yeah.
We don't want to just contemplate, as you say, but sometimes it's good just to take it.
Well, I
in,
think that's a very powerful part of the book, and I think there's something there to do with attentiveness as well. You being aware and attentive towards the craft, but many of these things, the artist is simply one who illustrates how we should kind of orientate ourselves towards the world. Like that attentiveness Yeah, not everything in the world takes a year to dry or whatever.
Sure.
But that basic attention to the world around us and the attention to the people around us, that is something that I think he would say, yeah, the artist can show you what the value of that attentiveness is. That in fact, even things like value, I'm not even sure that's the right word, the appropriateness of that attentiveness.
Because value almost gives the connotation, right? That it's like, oh, you value this and I value this.
And I think, so things like value, things like efficiency, those kind of things, those are words from a different context, and bringing them into this context, I think we lose the truth and reality of the art itself. And I don't think, and again, I might be wrong about this because I've not really processed this book, but I think what he's also telling us is that this kind of sense, we've talked a lot about the divide between the sacred and the secular. But here, there's also some kind of divide that's being broken down between the maybe in university terms, the kind of between engineering and the arts, right? Between these technical stuff like STEM, for example, and the humanities, right? That actually shouldn't really exist. These are all parts. This kind of artist is showing you that it is one whole, right? The dividing up of knowledge like that has not actually helped us a great deal either. It's dividing our souls ultimately.
Yes, exactly. Because how it's broad strokes divided in the academy is, oh, you want to know what the purpose of life is? Go to the humanities. You want to know how to get things done in the world? Go to the STEM. And I love his theology that he calls theology of making, and that everyone makes, right?
Yeah.
And so it's not just the artists who are making, it's the engineers who are making. So we need to humanitize, quote unquote, the STEM fields, but we also need to bring truth and reality to the humanities.
Last word about this before I guess we're probably getting to the end of our time here, but one of the things I felt was really useful as well is that really in that theology of making, built in there is it's kind of a system analysis, because people to people in our world, they talk about the systemic nature of, whatever things, economic injustice, let's say that, for example.
Okay.
And I think he certainly, and there might be a view of that says, well, that's not true. You just need to use the system and it will create great economic outcomes for those who work well. His point, I think, would be something along the lines of, no, you need to pay attention to that. You need to pay attention to the systems, to pay attention to and be attentive to the systems that create the outcomes. Are they in themselves the work of the maker? Those things too are important. And I think that was the whole perspective of this. We didn't even talk about his perspective on knowledge and the way that we understand things, which I think is also a pretty profound challenge to many of us in the Western world, and people like me who are brought up as engineers. That kind of propositional element of knowledge. He's trying to teach us that we can go beyond that.
And let's just camp out for just 1 or 2 minutes on that aspect, because I think it runs so deep through our listeners and indeed through us that it's kind of hard to see the water that we're swimming in. Because talking about how, so we use this phrase propositional knowledge, knowledge that something is the case, is not the deepest form of knowing, and this is illustrated and not even the most helpful in what we're trying to communicate about the gospel. He talks about how that there are philosophies and theological systems that attempt to argue people into the faith, and while there might be some good things about showing the reasonableness of the Christian faith, if that's where we stop, we've missed this profound depth of the Christian faith that is people are not going to be argued into. Rather, what Christians need to be concerned with is not simply winning arguments, but making beautiful things. That's to him, that's almost a more powerful apologetic, right?
Yeah.
That if we, like, there's a time, a space, a context that we need to have people working out these quote unquote propositional arguments, but the fullness and the multivariedness of the Christian life and what we're offering to the world needs to be made through through Christians making beautiful and just things.
It's intrinsic beauty. I think the faith's intrinsic beauty is the attractive thing. Mm-hmm. I see this from a perspective of my kids, and that there's no argument to be won there. You're not going to win an argument to them. And my kids all do okay in the faith, but at the end of the day, that's not how you're going to attract them to the faith, just by simply arguing their way into the kingdom.
Yes.
I just don't see that.
That's right.
And I'm less and less convinced that is a strategy that's actually worth anything. Mm-hmm. I'm more convinced, and this guy was really confirming a lot of this, is more convinced that the creation of good and true things, TrueWorks even, the creation of good things, mm-hmm. the creation of beautiful things, and that intrinsic beauty that is within the faith when it's practiced well, that is the attractive thing. That is the for want of a better word, the evangelical posture.
Mm-hmm, yeah. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a beautiful ending for this episode. Hopefully this has helped you to give a sense of what Fujimura is presenting, and that you can jump into the chapters assigned for this week. I've been your host on the TrueWorks podcast. My name is Joshua Smith, and I have Dougie Fresh. I meant Doug Meikle. Joining me as my co-host. Thank you, Doug.
Yeah, that's my rap handle, but not many people know that. Yeah,
yet, but he is an up and rising star.
Thank you.
If you want to hear more of our podcast, you can find our podcast on all platforms, or you can visit us on our website at trueworkshouston.org. Thank you so much, and see you next time.